Thank you and shout out to FC Playthroughs for all cutscene and gameplay footage used in this video. Check out their channel here on youtube.com. Hey, so do you remember this tweet from a few months ago? If you do, you may also remember the uproar it caused in the Sonic the Hedgehog fandom. Now, for those of you whose mothers didn't ingest Tylenol while you were in utero, let me explain. In October 2025, the head of Sonic Team, Takashi Iizuka, was invited to a Brazilian gaming convention to speak about the franchise. Sometime later, Twitter user @Genki_JPN translated the following from Iizuka's interview. Last year, we promoted the Year of Shadow, influenced by the movie. But I'd like to choose a theme each year and spotlight different characters. I think we can predict which characters will appear in the upcoming movie, so I'd like those characters to play an active role. That upcoming movie, Sonic the Hedgehog 4, is likely based on the 1993 game Sonic CD, where Amy Rose debuted. And since she appeared in the previous film's post-credit scene, a lot of fans interpreted Iizuka's words to mean that there will soon be a year of Amy Rose. After all, she's been around since the classic era, has grown into one of the franchise's most iconic characters, and 2027 would be the perfect year for the campaign, since that's when the fourth film is scheduled to hit theaters. Plus, it would do wonders for Amy's reputation, since she has never been the central focus of any game, hasn't had a notable subplot since 1998's Sonic Adventure, and was so poorly written for the better part of a decade that to this day, many dismiss her as the archetypal annoying fangirl. But then some Metal Sonic fans came along and said, "Excuse me, Argoat debuted in CD as well, and was in the same post-credit scene. Argoat was Sonic's first rival. Argoat is Eggman's greatest creation, and despite having so much potential to be the franchise's sickest villain, he's been cast aside and ignored by Sonic Team for far too long."
2027, dead or alive, is mine.
So yeah, once this rumor caught wind, a lot of fans started fighting over whether Amy or Metal is more deserving of having their own year. Therefore, we got tweets like this. Now, this video is not going to talk about which of these two deserve to have 2027 dedicated to themselves. Instead, it'll discuss the broader The Year of debates that have been brewing in the fandom for several months now.
It's me! It's me! It's me! It's probably not me.
We'll talk about the origin of this discourse, which characters fans argue are the most deserving of their own year, why some are doubtful that such a campaign will ever happen again, and finally, why we're so passionate about this in the first place, as if I just didn't hint at the answer a minute ago. So, in April 2024, Sega launched Fearless, The Year of Shadow, a campaign spotlighting Shadow the Hedgehog. With it came several Shadow-centered events and media, most notably the game Sonic X Shadow Generations, the animated web series Dark Beginnings, and of course his debut on the big screen in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. There are two ways to look at this campaign. On one level, it's just a cheap gimmick to capitalize on the third movie and Shadow Gens coming out in the same year. This is even more apparent by Iizuka tying his quote-unquote hopes for the next year of to whoever is debuting in the fourth film. On another, less cynical level, it was a celebration of Shadow and his legacy in the franchise. It was a fantastic time to be a fan of the ultimate life form. Not only was he receiving a bigger spotlight than ever before and gaining a new generation of fans, but the quality of the campaign's output was pretty impressive. Shadow Gens will surely go down as one of the few mainline games that is universally loved by the fandom. Dark Beginnings, in my opinion, is the best Sonic special in terms of writing, animation, and music, and the third Sonic movie is the most critically acclaimed of the current trilogy. The message from Sonic Team was clear. Shadow is a character that is worth investing time, money, and care into. He is so compelling that we will expand on his story in any and every medium, with dazzling visuals, hypnotic music, and top-tier writing any chance we get. But then, fans of other Sonic characters began to ask, what about us? When will our faves be celebrated, let alone to this degree? When will they get their own year of? It's like that one lyric in the song Hiss by Megan Thee Stallion.
Ever since I claimed the summer, all you bitches want a season.
So that's pretty much how these discussions began. However, there is one more thing to note about the whole Shadow campaign. Like anything that becomes immensely popular, the Year of Shadow has since garnered its share of haters. There has been a noticeable uptick in fans resenting Shadow for how well Sonic Team treats him compared to the rest of the cast. He already had a huge spotlight for a secondary character before 2024. He was the only regular besides Sonic himself who was portrayed with any dignity during the notorious post-adventure era. And there are a lot of times his elevation arguably comes at the expense of others. Take, for example, Team Dark in 2003's Sonic Heroes. This is one of the few times Shadow is on equal footing with other supporting characters in terms of development and screen time. And yet, Dark Beginnings is the first time in almost 20 years that the mainline series has acknowledged that Shadow is part of this larger team. Otherwise, Rouge the Bat and E123 Omega are consistently overlooked while Shadow gets all the attention. There's Knuckles the Echidna, who held the role of Sonic's most famous rival until Shadow came along. Not to mention that the Year of Shadow pretty much eclipsed Knuckles' 30th anniversary, though at least he was able to remain a core cast member after Shadow was introduced. Every other Sonic rival that came before or after has been paid dust these past 20 years. Metal, Blaze the Cat, Jet the Hawk, Silver the Hedgehog, none of them have gotten anywhere near Shadow's level of attention. Basically, Shadow was already overexposed, while others have been neglected and straight up undermined for years and sometimes decades by Sonic Team. So when he got his own year-long campaign to boot, that just added salt to the wound for some. And yes, this is the origin of those hilarious Shadow is greedy memes that have been popping up more and more.
Please, Shadow, can I have my own Year of Silver? Or at least a solo game? I'm starving!
I told you, Silver. You could have some when Sega gets tired of me and get what's left.
Now, I'm not bringing up this backlash to hate on Shadow or argue that he didn't deserve this campaign. After all, how can I hate on a character whose story made me fall in love with this franchise in the first place? No, I bring it up to give context to takes like this. When fans argue that this character deserves their own year more than that one, they're essentially saying, my fave has been most neglected over the years and needs immediate attention. Your fave can wait. But that's not the only criteria the fandom uses to argue who should get their own year. Perhaps the biggest factor is a character's story potential. For example, this is a poll I posted to the main Sonic subreddit asking which character deserves their own year of the most. Silver was the most popular choice, and it's not hard to see why. Since his debut in the game Sonic 06, Silver has slowly but surely become a fan favorite. A big reason why is his backstory, a boy who travels through time to secure a better future for all living things, but must grapple with the moral dilemma of taking one life to save that of millions. He's distinct enough from other hedgehogs in that he doesn't have Sonic's cool factor and maturity, nor Shadow's brooding and reservedness. He's unapologetically earnest, hopeful, and kind of childish, and therefore very, very endearing. Even if he isn't as fast as Sonic, he more than makes up for it with his incredibly creative telekinesis. I mean, this boss fight is insane. So yeah, Silver definitely has a compelling enough narrative to lead another game, comic, web episode, etc. It's no wonder then that anytime you search Year of in the main sub, he's the one that pops up the most, aside from Shadow. But there's another reason so many clamor for Silver to have his own year, something that's integral to his entire character: justice. Silver debuted in a game that was the beginning of a long, dark chapter in Sonic's history. No matter how many 06 apologists there are right now, the game's reception by critics and fans at the time was catastrophic. It was not only deemed a terrible game, but caused enough people to deem Sonic a terrible franchise, a reputation that would take almost 14 years to shake off. And when you're inextricably linked to such a legendary fall-off, you're not going to be seen that often in future projects. So was Silver's fate, with his only other mainline appearances being in Generations and Forces, neither of which are particularly great moments for him. Consequently, Silver fans are fed up with how underutilized he's been, how Sonic Team punishes him for daring to debut in their buggy, confusingly written train wreck of a game, how all of his promise has gone untapped.
It's to the point, right, that the young ones don't even know Silver, right? I was talking to my nephew, right? I'm sorry, my cousin, and he called Silver a potential man! My own flesh and blood called my goat a Megami! I can't keep fighting!
Therefore, a year-long campaign would wipe the slate clean and give Silver the justice he deserves after years of being the franchise's most famous potential man. Bro, think of the tagline, Justice, the Year of Silver. Y'all know I low-key cook with that. In addition to a snappy tagline, there's also the Central game and other media that go along with it. Reddit user Syrup621 made this awesome chart outlining the potential projects that would come out of different characters' campaigns. For example, the central game of Silver's year could be a bundle where his own story runs parallel to a remaster of Heroes, similar to Shadow Gens. Though I personally think if any game should be bundled with a Silver story, it should be a 3D remaster of CD, cause, time travel. However, if we don't get that concept in the games, we could get something similar in the movies. Like I said before, Movie 4 is most likely an adaptation of CD, and since this could introduce time travel into the Sonic cinematic universe, it allows Silver to appear in the next major installment. If that's the case, then 2030 might very well be the long-awaited year of Silver. Another big factor fans consider when arguing who should get their own year is how long a character has been around, and if they're due for a major evolution. Take Miles Tails Prower, who's been around since the classic era and is as iconic as the Blue Blur himself. You can argue that's because he spent the past 30 years glued to Sonic as his sidekick, but that's the point. If there were a year of Tails, he'd have a chance to be more than that. He'd have a chance to be his own person instead of just the meek, soft-spoken little kid who strives to be like his idol and best friend. He'd get the chance to appreciate his own brilliance, go out on his own adventures, and succeed all by himself. He'd get to be the independent hero we've only seen glimpses of in things like his classic-era spin-off, the adventure games, or Frontiers. Plus, like Silver, a year-long campaign would help make up for Sonic Team mismanaging Tails' character for several years. Only, instead of hardly letting him on the field, Tails' extensive screen time has, up until recently, been spent spewing technobabble and waiting for Sonic to save him. The most recent games show that the writers are in fact aware that us Tails fans are hungry for this evolution.
Whenever there's a crisis, I'm either running away or standing on the sidelines. You're always rescuing me when all I do is follow you around. This whole experience gave me a kind of clarity. When this is all over, I think I need to go it alone for a while. I can't grow into my full potential if I always fall back on you.
However, talk, or rather cutscene dialogue, is cheap. If they were serious, then they'd greenlight another solo game like 1995's Tails Adventure, a brand new platformer that emphasizes flying, mech fights, and puzzle solving. Just like with Dark Beginnings, Sonic Team could make a web series or short based on Tails Adventure. Hell, give the little guy his own Paramount Plus show like they did with Wade Whipple. For some reason. Because ultimately, what good is Frontiers lampshading how much Tails has regressed in past games if nothing is done to correct it in the future? Another factor is a character's lore and origin, especially if it's mostly unexplored. Case in point, Knuckles. If there's one character who it makes the most sense to give a campaign to, it's him. And I'm not just saying that because he's my favorite Sonic character. I'm saying it because his backstory is begging for further expansion in a triple solo game. Think about it. He spent his whole life on a giant floating island filled with a vast array of wildly different environments and ancient secrets. He's the guardian of a giant gem that neutralizes emeralds that turn thoughts into reality. And he's the endling of a long-gone species and culture that he only has the vaguest idea of. The only time the mainline series attempted to explore Knuckles' past is the first adventure game, where it's revealed that the Echidnas went near extinct because one of their chiefs tried to use the Master Emerald for warmongering, causing the god Chaos to go on a bloody rampage. But even then, it's not explained how Knuckles is here if all the other Echidnas were wiped out, or why someone from the very species that tried to abuse the Master Emerald is left to guard it. There's this bullshit cutscene at the end of Knuckles' story where, after having visions of his people that honestly leave more questions than answers, he simply resigns himself to forever guarding the Emerald despite still not knowing his own origin, or why he must go on with this giant glowing albatross around his neck. His perspective is completely unchanged. Frontiers tried to correct this massive fumble by revealing that this burden has caused Knuckles to suffer from emotional isolation and existential dread, but there's only so much that can be explored in a game where he isn't the main focus. So the obvious answer then is to make this the premise of Knuckles' own solo game. Like his debut, the player could explore all of Angel Island zones and beyond. Only instead of the story just being about Knuckles wanting to defend his home from enemies, it would also be about him searching for answers to questions he's always had about his individual past and present. This game would likely not solve every single mystery, but the important thing is that Knuckles' perspective on his life and his role would be forever changed. He would finally accept that he has other duties that are equally important, namely taking care of his friends and his own well-being, both of which will require him to leave his island more often in the future. We've already discussed the boost in reputation that can come from Amy or Metal getting their own campaigns. And geez, what about Eggman? You know, the go-to villain of the entire franchise, the oldest secondary character in all of Sonic, whose development actually predates Needlemouse himself. Certainly he deserves his own solo game, maybe a Forces prequel that goes over how he succeeded in taking over the entire world. And those are just the campaigns for singular characters. What about the franchise's iconic groupings, like the Chaotix or these Bird Brains? The possibilities are endless, so long as Sonic Team and Sega are willing to take the risk on these characters. And that's the problem with this whole year of thing. Out of the many factors discussed about which character could get their own campaign, the one that actually matters is money. Sega is, at the end of the day, a corporation, and the number one priority of any corporation is to make ungodly amounts of money. You can grumble all you want about Shadow getting his own year when he was already overexposed, but it makes perfect sense financially speaking. There's a reason why Shadow is on so much merch. There's a reason why he's frequently on TV shows where he doesn't belong. There's a reason the SCU introduced him in the coveted spot of third installment before Amy, even though she is, depending on the plot of any given game, a member of Team Sonic. Like it or not, this Hot Topic wannabe makes bands. Of course Sega's gonna throw all its resources behind him. The question is, can characters who aren't Shadow or Sonic make bands? Let's say they want to greenlight that Eggman Forces prequel. Will it do Shadow Gen's numbers? Will it be a giant waste of money? Perhaps something in between? That's the risk Sega takes. And in the eyes of most corporations, the key to massive profits is avoiding risk whenever possible. Therefore, fans argue that the less likely a character's solo game would sell, the less likely they'd get a campaign. But it's not enough to say this character's year won't make any money. We need to ask why it wouldn't. The obvious answer is that they aren't popular or mainstream enough. And when I say mainstream, I mean they pique the interest of non-Sonic fans who, in the eyes of Sega, are a potential pool of customers to profit from. For example, Blaze might be well liked in the fandom itself, but realistically, how many outsiders would even recognize her on a piece of merch? So if popularity is the key to getting the next year of, why is it that no other character has ever come close to being as beloved as Sonic or Shadow? Now, every character is different and has their own unique traits that make a lot of fans like or dislike them. However, I'd argue there are three things that prevent most of them from becoming anywhere near as popular as these two. First, the reputation of a character's debut game. First impressions matter. Like I said when discussing Silver in 06, if a game is a critical flop, any character that premiered in it would be lucky to show up in any future installment. It's partly why you haven't seen folks like Princess Elise, Chip, The Deadly Six, and Midfinite, and I did not misspeak there, in any mainline game, not counting cameos, since their debut. Sometimes it isn't the game itself that leaves a poor impression, but the character's actual role or gameplay style. It's why we rarely saw Amy in any serious classic-era content after CD, or why so many fans hated Big the Cat for a good 15 years after the first adventure game. The less a character shows up, the less chances fans have to grow attached to them. Therefore, they never really get the chance to become very popular. The funny thing is, if a character has a less than stellar debut, giving them a great appearance and a follow-up could very well boost their popularity. Look at the Chaotix. They debuted in 1995's Knuckles Chaotix, which was a critical and commercial disappointment. Their next and most iconic appearance, however, was in Heroes, in which each member of this impoverished detective agency was expanded on, refined, and made to stand out in a crowded roster. Thanks to this appearance, and others after, this trio became fan favorites, so much so that they now have a true crime podcast. Though, just remember that that follow-up appearance needs to be good, otherwise you just further the notion that the character is a joke. The second thing that can limit a character's popularity is lack of lore. Not everyone needs an origin as deep and extensive as Shadow's to be popular, but his backstory is a big part of his appeal. It's not just because it's tragic, but because it contextualizes Shadow's personality and actions. It explains why he goes from wanting to destroy humanity to saving it, why he can be so full of himself yet be at a loss as to what's his purpose in life. His lore makes him that much more compelling, but many other characters don't get lore, and when they do, it's rarely given enough time to sink in and stick with you. Sometimes this is due to technological limitations, like the classic-era games, but what about when the technology does allow for immersive storytelling with cutscenes and dialogue? What's the excuse then? Look at Rouge. She debuted in the same game as Shadow, and is one of the few morally gray characters in the franchise. Yet we know nothing about her past. Why does she only look out for herself most of the time? What caused her to be so mercenary and deceitful? How did she come to believe it's better to steal jewels than just buy them? We don't know because she's never been given any lore. You're telling me a jewel thief that willingly works as a spy for a jackbooted government organization has nothing of note in her past? I can't help but think that this failure to expand on Rouge is a big reason you don't see anyone talk about her having her own year. Which leads to the third thing that keeps so many from reaching Shadow levels of popularity: lack of or poor character development. Many simply haven't grown or changed in a notable way for several years. Sometimes it's because their overall role is to be cuteness fodder or comic relief and not much else, but for more serious characters, the plot of many past games gave them no chance to evolve. And that's if they were lucky. During the Dark and Meta era, a character could be dealt a far worse hand by Sonic Team's writers. They could have all their growth and accomplishments from previous games forgotten and regress into something that's unrecognizable from their earliest outings, like Tails. Their interests and personality could be misconstrued and flanderized, turning them into a pathetic nuisance like Amy. Or their character could be completely derailed to suit a comic relief role they were never meant for, turning them from a dutiful, headstrong loner who was the first major Sonic character to go through an arc, in their debut no less, and lead the way for these games to go from silly one-dimensional platformers to the rich, compelling narratives they are now to...
Knuckles can't catch me, Knuckles can't catch me, Knuckles can't catch me, na 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 na.
You're gonna be sorry you said that, Buzz Boy!
I swear, if Sonic X has no haters, I am dead. The thing is, Shadow was also a victim of bad writing during the latter half of the 2000s and 2010s. He was misconstrued into a shallow caricature of himself to the dismay of many. Nevertheless, he was still the second most popular character. A big reason why is, however poor his characterization was during this time, he was still, as previously noted, treated with a degree of respect by the writers. By contrast, core cast members like Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Eggman were degraded with each new entry. On the flip side, characters that weren't reduced to absolute clowns like Silver, Blaze, Rouge, or Metal hardly ever got to be in installments, and when they were, it was pretty much as a glorified cameo. See Forces. So, from the bottom up, why is it unlikely that certain characters will ever get their own year? It could be that Sonic Team couldn't bother to incorporate them into a story where they could leave a meaningful impact, or the writers prefer to turn them into butt monkeys to laugh or cringe at. And because so many characters were either punching bags or non-entities, there was no need to attach any intriguing lore to them. Without that, fans can't speculate on what other stories could be told with those characters. Perhaps they had the misfortune of premiering in a sloppily written and designed game. Or maybe the character is Blaze, who did everything right and still has been all but forgotten in the mainline series. Whether it's one of or all of these factors, the result is that they aren't popular enough for people to spend money on. Thus, they'll never get their own campaign. Or so the argument goes. What keeps me from completely buying into it is that none of these factors make another year of dead on arrival. Like I said with the Chaotix, the way to reverse a lackluster first impression is to try and get it right with the next installment. Sonic Team could write the rest of its core cast members with dignity and respect. It could take time to properly craft the plot and mechanics of mainline games into something that will stand the test of time. And thankfully, they've begun doing just that ever since the 2020s began. It's just that so many seem to think that the damage is done with certain characters, to the point where they believe that not even a solo game would be successful.
I'm never getting another game! I'm never getting my own game!
But isn't this attitude kind of self-defeating? Because if Sonic Team keeps hearing that this character won't have their own game because they won't sell as well as Shadow, then they aren't going to make one. Depending on how negative the discourse is around them, they might not even have a small side story for several installments. Then years go by without the character doing anything of significance and therefore not leaving a strong impression on players. This in turn causes fans to assume that that character isn't popular enough to sell a solo game. And thus the vicious cycle continues. A cycle that, funny enough, is implicitly called out in this panel from Amy's 30th anniversary comic. So, why do we care so much about other characters having their own year? Why is this such a heated topic in the fandom? Because it's cathartic. It gives us a chance to express an emotion that's near universal to being a Sonic fan. Frustration. Fans are frustrated that characters with so much promise have languished off-screen for years. They're frustrated when a game provides a cool premise that could expand the setting and give insight into a character's history, only for that premise to go unexplored. And they're frustrated that even though this could be solved through producing new games that focus on those characters, it's unlikely to happen unless it's guaranteed Sega will earn an obscene profit. With all that said, there are a few things to remember that should leave us all a bit more optimistic. First, the mainline games aren't the only way to boost a character. There's also the IDW comics and the movies. The IDW characters Whisper and Tangle have become so popular that they're now being incorporated into the mainline universe, and even games like Crossworlds and Rumble. Plus, IDW has been the only place for some time now where characters like Silver, Metal, and Blaze get a chance to shine. And if you're about to dismiss these comics as mostly inconsequential side content, remember that their head writer is a big reason the writing in the mainline games has seen a meteoric rise in quality. In other words, they're a lot more influential than you realize, and will become even more so in the future. Then there's the movies, which have been crucial in courting a new generation of fans. In fact, it might be better for newcomers to be introduced to certain characters through the movies as opposed to the games, since the former is a more accessible medium. The SAU's version of any given character may become way more popular than the original game version, which could cause Sonic Team to capitalize off them in a future project.
Hell, Yazuka seems ready to do just that with Amy or Metal, and we won't even see them on the big screen until 12 months from now.
In fact, Sonic Team cares a lot more about characters who aren't Sonic or Shadow than they did 10 years ago. This is especially true for the 3 other members of Team Sonic. All of them had pretty good 30th anniversary comics, and Frontiers' story was just as much about their own personal struggles as it was about Sonic traveling through the Starfall Islands. If another campaign is truly in the works, one of these 3 will certainly be the subject. And once the core cast gets their flowers, it's only a matter of time before other characters do. Yes, it's been frustrating seeing these characters not reach their potential for roughly 20 years, but we have to remember that we're only 6 years into the Blue Blur's comeback. Frontiers, which heavily hints at Tails, Knuckles, and Amy going on life-changing solo quests, was only 4 years ago, and Shadow was only restored to his adventure-era glory 2 years ago. If we're being honest, a lot of the frustration we're feeling is just impatience. But if you really can't wait for your favorite character to shine through and be the it girl of the year, remember that you can make that happen yourself. You don't need Sega to put out an official campaign to celebrate your fave or highlight their greatest moments. You can link up with others to create blogs, host web events, or collaborate on and share fan-made art, videos, or even games about that character. That's what a bunch of Knuckles fans did on Tumblr last year, and it was fantastic. Now, is it nice when a massive company puts a shiny spotlight of validation on something or someone you care about? Of course. But I'm telling you that any grassroots celebration or campaign you and a bunch of other freaks come up with and spread the word about will be a lot more valuable than you give it credit for. Especially here, where the fans and their beautifully strange creations are a big part of what makes Sonic so special. By the way, I lied. 2027 should be the year of Amy. F*** that clanker. Like and subscribe. See you next time.